The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren landscape of the Southwestern desert. Our road trip had been a spontaneous decision. One of those last-minute plans that sounded like a great idea when you're surrounded by friends and fueled by cheap beer. We had all craved an escape from the monotony of city life. A taste of freedom under the wide-open sky, with nothing but miles of sand and rock for company. As the evening crept in, the golden light began to bleed into a dusky orange, and the air turned cooler, signaling that it was time to find a place to settle for the night. After driving for hours, we pulled over to a spot that looked as good as any. Isolated, quiet, and far from civilization. The kind of place that makes you feel like the last person on Earth. We set up camp quickly, laughing and joking as the tent poles clicked together. But as the sun dipped lower, an unsettling quiet fell over us, as if the desert itself had decided to swallow all sound. The only noise was the occasional rustle of the wind through the sparse vegetation and the distant call of a coyote. "Feels like we're the only ones out here," one of us remarked, the words hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. Once the fire was lit, its flickering flames casting twisted shadows on the sand, the uneasy feeling began to fade. We told stories, roasted marshmallows, and let the night stretch out in front of us, a seemingly endless expanse of time with no obligations, no deadlines. But the peace was fleeting. It started with a low sound, barely audible over the crackling fire. A shuffling, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the sand. We all heard it but didn't say anything at first, each of us hoping someone else would break the silence. "Did you hear that?" someone finally asked, their voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded, eyes darting around the campfire, searching for the source of the noise. "It's probably just an animal," another voice offered, trying to sound casual but failing to mask the underlying tension. But then we saw it. Just beyond the reach of the firelight, a figure standing still as a statue. It was impossible to make out any details in the dim light, but its presence was undeniable. We all froze, the hair on the back of our necks standing on end. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching us. "Who the hell is that?" someone whispered harshly, but no one had an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it at the figure. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. The figure was gone. The light illuminated only empty space and the endless stretch of desert behind it. "Where did it go?" I muttered, lowering the flashlight in confusion. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the figure reappeared, closer this time, just at the edge of the light. Panic began to set in. "We need to go," someone urged, their voice shaking. But before we could gather our things, the figure stepped into the light. It was one of us. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The figure was an exact replica of one of our friends, down to the clothes they were wearing, the way they stood. But the eyes were wrong. They were cold, hollow, devoid of any life. What the hell is going on?" I stammered, stepping back in horror. The double stared at us, its expression unreadable. Then slowly it smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile that sent a wave of terror through me. And then it spoke, its voice a distorted echo of our friends. "You can't leave." Panic erupted as we tried to figure out what to do. But the more we argued, the more we realized we had no idea who we could trust. The figure, this thing, could be any one of us. It could have already taken someone's place. And as the fire crackled and the desert night deepened, one horrifying thought kept echoing in my mind. We were no longer alone in the desert, and one of us wasn't who they appeared to be. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky as we stared at the figure standing before us. A perfect copy of one of our friends, but with those dead, hollow eyes that betrayed something far darker within. My heart pounded in my chest as we stood frozen in terror, unsure of what to do next. It felt like we were caught in some twisted nightmare, one that we couldn't wake up from. "We need to get out of here," someone said again, their voice trembling, but none of us moved. It was as if fear had rooted us to the spot. The figure took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring our fear. The smile never left its face, and those eyes locked onto each of us as if it was deciding who to take next. "This isn't real," someone muttered, almost as if they were trying to convince themselves. It can't be real. But it was real. The thing was standing right in front of us, its presence an undeniable, bone-chilling reality. And the worst part was, we didn't know where the real person had gone. Was our friend still out there, lost somewhere in the desert? Or was this thing all that was left? "We need to stick together," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "No one goes anywhere alone." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. How could we stick together when we couldn't even trust each other? The thought gnawed at the back of my mind like a parasite, feeding on my fear. "Let's just get in the car and leave," another voice suggested. But the figure, no, the imposter, blocked our path. It wasn't moving to let us go. "Move!" one of us demanded, but the imposter simply tilted its head, that eerie smile never faltering. And then, in a voice that sent shivers down my spine, it spoke again, this time mimicking our friend's voice perfectly. "You can't escape me, I'm already one of you." A cold chill ran through me as the implications of its words sank in. If it could become one of us, then who's to say it hadn't already done so? How could we possibly know who was real and who was something else? Without warning, the imposter lunged forward, its movements unnaturally fast and jerky. We scattered, adrenaline taking over as we ran in different directions. In the chaos, I lost sight of everyone. The darkness of the desert closed in around me, the campfire now a distant glow in the night. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, the fear driving me forward even though I had no idea where I was going. The vast emptiness of the desert felt suffocating, the silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Finally, I stopped, collapsing to my knees, trying to catch my breath. But as I did, the reality of my situation hit me. I was alone, completely alone in the dark, with that thing somewhere out there hunting us down. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned around, flashlight shaking in my hand. But the beam of light revealed nothing but the barren desert. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. But then, a voice, so familiar it made my blood run cold, spoke from the darkness. "Why did you leave me behind?" It was my friend's voice, but I knew better. I knew it wasn't them. It was the thing, the shapeshifter, playing tricks on my mind, trying to lure me in. "I'm not falling for it," I whispered to myself. But the doubt gnawed at me. What if it was my friend? What if they were out there, scared and alone, and I was abandoning them to whatever this thing was? The voice came again, closer this time. "Please don't leave me!" My heart was in my throat as I struggled with the decision. Do I go back and risk running into the shapeshifter? Or do I keep running, hoping to find the others? But before I could decide, the light from my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. Panic surged through me as I frantically slapped the flashlight, trying to get it to work. But it was no use. The darkness was absolute, and the footsteps were getting closer. And then out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. A shadow, barely visible against the inky blackness, creeping toward me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't just one shadow. There were several, closing in from all sides. My heart raced as I realized the horrible truth. It wasn't just one shapeshifter. There were more, and they were all around me. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep the fear from my voice, but it was a futile effort. The shadows moved closer, the footsteps growing louder, echoing in the still night air. And then, just when I thought they were about to reach me, the shadows stopped. I could feel their presence just out of sight, watching me, waiting. A voice, cold and mocking, whispered in the darkness. "You'll never know who's real and who's not." And with that, the shadows disappeared, melting back into the night, leaving me alone and trembling in the desert. But the fear didn't leave me. It only grew stronger as I realized the full extent of the nightmare we were trapped in. We weren't just running from the shapeshifter. We were running from each other, because any one of us could be the next to change. And we'd never know until it was too late. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, a suffocating blanket of fear that made it impossible to think clearly. My flashlight was dead, and with it, any semblance of control I might have had over the situation. I could still hear the faint echoes of footsteps in the distance, but whether they were real or imagined, I couldn't tell. Every sense was heightened, every shadow a potential threat. I forced myself to stand, wiping the cold sweat from my brow. My mind raced with questions and half-formed plans, but none of them made any sense. The shapeshifter could be anyone, anything. It could even be me for all I knew. How could I trust my own thoughts when every sound, every movement was steeped in paranoia? As I took a tentative step forward, trying to get my bearings, a flicker of light caught my eye. Off in the distance, the campfire still burned, a small beacon in the vast darkness. I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe the others had made it back to the camp. Maybe they were waiting for me, safe and sound. But the memory of the shapeshifter's cold smile sent a chill down my spine. Was it really safe? Or was the fire just a trap, luring me in like a moth to a flame? I hesitated, torn between the need for safety and the gnawing fear that the fire could be my doom. Finally, the desire to not be alone outweighed my fear. I started walking, keeping my steps light and quiet, ears straining for any hint of movement around me. Every now and then I would pause, listening for those footsteps, those whispers. But all I heard was the desert wind, and even that seemed too quiet, too unnatural. As I got closer to the camp, I could make out the silhouettes of the tents and the faint glow of the fire. Relief washed over me. At least the camp was still there, untouched. But as I drew nearer, something felt off. The air was heavy with a sense of wrongness that I couldn't quite place. And then I saw them. Two figures sitting by the fire, their backs turned to me, They were talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to recognize who they were. Was it my friends? Or was it something else, pretending to be them? "Guys?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. The figures froze, then slowly turned to face me. The firelight flickered over their faces, casting eerie shadows that made it hard to see clearly. But what I could see made my blood run cold. Their faces were blank, expressionless, like masks made of flesh. Their eyes, those dead, hollow eyes, stared back at me with a chilling emptiness. I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The figures stood up, their movements unnervingly synchronized, and started walking toward me. Their footsteps were slow, deliberate, like they were savoring the fear radiating off me. "Stay back!" I yelled, but the words came out more like a plea than a command. They didn't stop. They just kept coming, their faces devoid of anything remotely human. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do, how to fight them, but nothing seemed to make sense. How do you fight something that can become anyone? That can take on the form of your friends, your family, even you? Just as they were about to reach me, a voice rang out from the darkness, a voice I recognized. "Get away from them!" I turned to see one of my friends running toward the camp, holding something in their hand. Something that glinted in the firelight. It was a knife. But before I could process what was happening, the friend who had just arrived lunged at the two figures, slashing wildly. There was a sickening sound as the blade met flesh. But instead of blood, something dark and thick oozed from the wounds, something that smelled of rot and decay. The figures let out a ghastly, inhuman screech, a sound that cut through the night like a knife. They staggered back, but they didn't fall. Instead, their forms began to shift and contort, the flesh rippling like water, as if trying to decide what shape to take next. My friend grabbed my arm, yanking me back toward the edge of the camp. "Run!" they shouted, and this time I didn't hesitate. We ran as fast as we could, leaving the campfire behind, the screeching of the shapeshifters still echoing in our ears. The desert blurred around us as we sprinted into the darkness, the adrenaline numbing the pain in my legs, the terror fueling my every step. We didn't stop until we reached a cluster of rocks where we finally collapsed, gasping for breath. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The figures, the shapeshifters. They had been so close, too close. "Are you okay?" my friend asked, their voice trembling as much as mine had earlier. I think so," I managed to say, though the words felt hollow. How could I be okay after what we'd just seen? After knowing those things were still out there, hunting us, wearing the faces of the people we trusted? As we caught our breath, I finally took a good look at my friend, the one who had saved me. There was blood on their clothes, but not theirs. It was the dark, putrid substance that had oozed from the shapeshifters. Their eyes, however, looked normal, human, filled with fear and uncertainty. But the doubt gnawed at me again. How could I be sure? How could I know that this person sitting beside me wasn't just another trick? Another shapeshifter, biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike? Before I could ask, another noise reached our ears. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the sand. We both tensed, eyes scanning the darkness, searching for the source. "Do you hear that?" my friend whispered, their voice barely audible. I nodded, gripping the rock beside me as if it could somehow protect me from whatever was out there. The rustling grew louder, closer, until it was right on top of us. And then from the shadows, another figure emerged. This one looked disheveled, dirty, but unmistakably human. It was another one of our friends, stumbling toward us with a look of pure terror on their face. "They're coming!" they gasped, collapsing at our feet. "They're coming for us." My heart sank. How many of us were left? How many had already been taken? And how long could we keep running before the shapeshifters caught up to us? But as the three of us huddled together, trying to figure out our next move, one thought kept gnawing at the back of my mind. A thought that filled me with a growing sense of dread. What if one of us was already one of them? The air was thick with tension, the silence between the three of us almost unbearable as we sat huddled among the rocks. My mind was a whirl of paranoia and fear, the constant thought echoing in my head. What if one of us is already one of them? I glanced at my two companions. They looked terrified, worn out, and covered in dirt just like me. But that didn't mean anything. The shapeshifter could mimic our every move, our every expression. It could be sitting right next to me, wearing the face of someone I trusted, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "We can't stay here," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "They'll find us." My friend, the one who had saved me earlier, nodded in agreement. "We need to keep moving. Try to find a road or something. Maybe we can flag down a car." But what if... The other friend, the one who had stumbled upon us, trailed off, their eyes wide with fear. What if it's already too late? The question hung in the air, heavy and ominous. None of us wanted to acknowledge the possibility, but it was impossible to ignore. The shapeshifter was smart, cunning. It wouldn't just attack outright. It would wait, biding its time, letting the fear and distrust tear us apart from the inside. "We stick together," my friend said firmly, "no matter what." But as we set off into the darkness, every step was filled with doubt. Each rustle of the wind, each crunch of sand beneath our feet felt like the start of an attack. Every time one of us so much as breathed too loudly, the others would flinch, eyes darting around for signs of danger. We walked for what felt like hours, the desert stretching out endlessly before us. The cold night air bit at our skin, and the stars above offered little comfort. They were distant, unreachable, just like any hope of rescue. And then, in the distance, we saw it. A faint light, barely visible, but unmistakable. A flicker of hope stirred within me. Maybe it was a car. Maybe it was someone who could help us. We quickened our pace, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten as we made our way toward the light. But as we got closer, that uneasy feeling crept back in. The light wasn't moving. It was stationary, like a campfire or a lantern. "What if it's them?" I asked, voicing the fear we all shared. "We don't have a choice," my friend replied, though their voice betrayed their own uncertainty. "We can't keep wandering out here. We'll die of exposure before anything else." Reluctantly, we continued forward, the light growing brighter as we approached. Soon we could make out the source, a small campfire, eerily similar to the one we had set up earlier that night, and sitting around it were two figures. We froze, hearts pounding in unison. The figures hadn't noticed us yet, but it wouldn't be long before they did. "It's a trap," I whispered, though part of me wanted to believe it wasn't. Part of me wanted to believe we had found help, that this nightmare was finally over. But deep down, I knew better. The shapeshifters were clever. They knew how to play with our minds, how to make us question everything. "Wait here," my friend said, and before I could protest, they began to creep forward, moving silently through the shadows. I watched, my breath caught in my throat as they approached the campfire. The two figures remained motionless, their backs to us. But as my friend got closer, one of the figures began to stir, as if sensing their presence. I tensed, ready to run or fight whatever was necessary, when the figure slowly turned its head. The firelight cast flickering shadows over its face, making it hard to see clearly. But then, my friends stopped in their tracks, a gasp escaping their lips. "No, it can't be," they whispered, loud enough for me to hear. And in that moment I knew something was terribly wrong. The figure's face, now fully illuminated by the fire, was identical to my friend's. The same clothes, the same hair, the same terrified expression. But those eyes, those hollow, dead eyes, filled with a malice that sent a jolt of terror through me. I wanted to scream to warn my friend, but my voice caught in my throat. The second figure turned then, revealing a face that was also familiar. My own face. The shock hit me like a physical blow, and I stumbled back, the ground spinning beneath me. How could this be possible? How could the shapeshifter have taken on my form while I was still standing there? My friend looked back at me, their expression a mixture of horror and confusion. They opened their mouth to say something, but before they could, the figure, the one with my face, lunged at them, moving with unnatural speed. In an instant, the campfire erupted into chaos. My friend fought desperately, trying to fend off the doppelganger, but the thing was too strong, too fast. The other figure, the one with my friend's face, joined the attack, its movements eerily coordinated. I wanted to help, wanted to do something, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. The sounds of the struggle filled the air. Grunts, screams, the sickening thud of fists meeting flesh. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. My friend lay motionless on the ground, their body twisted at an unnatural angle. The two figures stood over them, their faces emotionless, their eyes empty. And then, as if sensing my presence, they both turned to look at me. The sight of my own face, distorted by that soulless gaze, sent a wave of nausea through me. I backed away, stumbling over rocks and loose sand, my mind screaming at me to run, to get away, but my legs felt like lead. The figures began to walk toward me. Slowly at first, but with a deliberate purpose that filled me with dread. I knew I couldn't outrun them. I knew that somehow they would catch me, and I would end up just like my friend. But then a thought, a horrible, gut-wrenching thought, flashed through my mind. What if I was the shapeshifter? What if I had been the imposter all along and this was all part of its sick game? The doubt, the fear, it all came crashing down on me, suffocating me in its grip. How could I know who I was anymore? How could I trust my own memories, my own thoughts, when the shapeshifter had already shown it could take on any form? I stumbled again, falling to my knees, the desert spinning around me. The figures were almost upon me now, their footsteps slow and steady, the sound of inevitability. And as they reached me, as I looked up into the faces that mirrored my own, I realized the horrifying truth. I was never real. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in a sea of despair. The shapeshifter hadn't just taken on my form, it had created me. I was nothing more than a projection, a puppet controlled by something far more sinister, something that had been toying with me from the start. As the figures closed in, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles, I knew there was no escape. The nightmare wasn't just around me, it was inside me. And as they reached out to claim me, the last shred of my humanity slipped away, leaving nothing but darkness.